Chapter 101 Shizun, the last flame in this world. Moran said nothing for a long while. Then he smiled brightly. A pavilion with only one master would make a good tale, huh? Well said. His shapely feet trod unhurriedly across the ice-cold stone of the floor, the blue vein across the top flexing as he came to a stop before Song Chutong. Moran lifted one foot and tipped Song Chutong's chin up with his toes, compelling her to meet his gaze. "You've been keeping all this bottled up for quite some time, hm?" He looked down upon her terror-stricken face with a smile. "Empress Song, you know, there are a number of things I've never asked you about. Since you're pouring your heart out today, why don't we just have it all out, hm? Come, let's have a nice chat. We can start with the most recent." Moran continued. "The day I set out for Tashur Palace, I clearly remember locking Chu Wanning in the residential palace before leaving. So tell me, how was it that he appeared at Kunlun Mountain? Who let him out and allowed him to come find me?" Song Chutong's entire body shuddered. I don't know," she exclaimed. In her panic to explain herself, she even forgot to refer to herself as this one, slipping into I instead. Moran smiled. "All right, you don't know that one. Next then. The year I made you empress, I also entrusted you with the management of Xisheng Peak. Afterward, I had to travel to Yin Mountain to take care of some business. Chu Wanning had been disobedient at the time, so I had him locked in the water prison to reflect on his actions." Song Chutong's face grew pale at his mention of this matter, and her lips began to quiver. "You used the excuse of a prison inspection and went to visit him, but he thoroughly scorned you." Yes," Song Chutong said in a rush. "But, Your Majesty, Aran, I told you about this incident back when it happened. Chu Songshe dismissed me in such a disparaging manner, and then proceeded to insult not only myself, but Your Majesty as well. I couldn't contain my anger at the time. This venerable one knows." Moran's smile was faint. "You couldn't contain your anger at the time, but Chu Wanning had committed grave sins, and his punishment couldn't be increased without this venerable one's permission. So you carried out a piece of minor discipline, and had all 10 of his nails pulled out and stinging thorns inserted into the tip of each finger." Song Chutong's eyes filled with horror as she scrambled to say, "Your Majesty, when you returned, you praised me for doing well." Moran continued to smile. "Oh, did I?" You said that foul-mouthed people should be treated just so, and you even told this one that the punishment was rather light, that if he should speak rudely again in the future, to break his fingers." Her voice trailed off until, in the end, faced with the terrifying smile on Moran's face, she collapsed to the ground in tears. "Aran!" Moran sighed softly. He smiled. "Chutong, that was so long ago. This venerable one no longer remembers what he said or didn't say back then." Song Chutong held her tongue. She had by now guessed Moran's intent, but her body still shuddered violently at his words. "This venerable one's been having dreams lately. Dreams about that day, returning from Yin Mountain and arriving at the water prison to find him with both hands festering and covered in blood." Moran spoke slowly, but his voice tightened toward the end, and a cold light flashed in his eyes. This venerable one was not happy. Your Majesty! Your Majesty!" Song Chutong repeated helplessly. "No, Aran! Let me explain. Please calm down and let me explain." This venerable one was not happy. Moran continued, as if he hadn't heard a word, lowering his expressionless face to look coolly at the woman huddled on the floor. "Indulge me a bit, won't you?" Song Chutong had spent these years at Moran's side with her life on the line, like sleeping beside a ferocious tiger. Nevertheless, when she saw Moran's countenance like frost and snow, paired with such an imperious request, Song Chutong broke out in goose flesh and her scalp went numb. She could smell the scent of the oncoming storm. She lifted her deep brown eyes and peered meekly at him as she crawled forward on all fours to nestle herself by his ankles. "Of course, anything Aran says. What can I do to make Aran happy? Definitely. Moran leaned over and gripped her jaw, wrenching her face upward. He wore a lovely, innocent smile, just like the one he'd worn when he first laid eyes on her at Rufengsekt. Then, twin pools of sweet dimples had adored his cheek as he tugged at her sleeve and said, "Xiaoshimei, what's your name? Hi, don't be afraid. I won't hurt you. Talk to me, okay?" She shuddered. After so many years, yet with practically the same expression and the same tone, he said something else altogether. "Chutong, this venerable one knows you mean it, that you'll do anything to make this venerable one happy." His words were sweet and gentle, and his fingertip caressed her soft lips, the part of her that looked most like Xi Mingjing. Moran's lashes trembled lightly as he stared calmly at those petal-like lips. Finally, he said, "Then you may go wait for this venerable one on the road to hell." Song Chitong froze. "Okay?" he asked gently. The tears that spilled from Song Chitong's eyes were not from sadness, but from fear. She'd known the instant Moran brought up her past abuse of Chu Wanning that this was going to end badly for her, but she thought the worst that could happen would be punishment by the rod or the loss of her title. She did not have the courage to even imagine that Moran would that he could actually bear to. Madman. He's gone mad. Moran threw his head back and laughed in a low voice. His laughter grew increasingly arrogant, increasingly unrestrained. He laughed as he kicked open the door of the residential palace, laughed as he strode outside. He had always trod with abandon, had trampled countless lives. Now it was her turn. He's gone mad. Wu Weiyu has really gone mad. Song Chitong sank to her knees on that ice-cold floor of stone and golden bricks. The ardor of intimacy within the residential palace had yet to dissipate, but the fires of hell had begun to burn. With her mouth hanging slack and her head tipped backward, she struggled to look at the sky outside the palace. Dawn was breaking, and the sky was the color of blood. Her bloodshot eyes were dyed crimson. In the distance, she heard Moran call, so casual he might have been ordering his dinner for the day. "Guards, take the Empress away." "Your Majesty!" came the panicked reactions of the retinue outside. "Your Majesty, this—" "Toss her in the cauldron. Fry her alive." Song Chitong suddenly couldn't hear anything more, like she had sunk deep into the ocean. She couldn't hear anything more. Fry her alive. It'll be a lively good time that way. He walked farther and farther away, yet the sound of his laughter and shouting lingered over Xixing Peak like a high-flying eagle wheeling across the sky. The rising sun painted a long shadow behind him, a lonely figure on the ground. Ever so slowly he walked. At first, the silhouettes of two youths seemed to walk beside him, and a tall man in white robes. Then the two silhouettes disappeared, leaving only the man in white robes to accompany him. He walked on, and the white-robed man, too, vanished into the golden dawn. The rising sun was pure and unblemished, and it claimed those who were likewise pure and unblemished, leaving only him, alone in hell, drowning in an ocean of blood, sinking into the masses of ghosts and fiends. Only him, all alone, growing lonelier and colder the farther he walked. He walked until he felt like he was dead, that he had already died, becoming more deeply deranged with every step. Moran remembered in the year before he took his own life, that when he looked into the copper mirror, he sometimes couldn't even recognize the monster staring back at him. He remembered the night before he died, when he sat in the bamboo pavilion at the Red Lotus Pavilion with only an old servant to keep him company. Liu Gong. He had asked lazily, what kind of person did this venerable one used to be? He carried on without waiting for an answer, staring at his own reflection in the pond. This venerable one didn't used to wear his hair like this when he was young, much less this tasseled crown, right? Liu Gong sighed. It is as your majesty says. The crown and hairstyle were both the recommendation of Empress Song after your ascension to the throne. Oh, you mean Song Chitong? Moran sneered and tipped his head back to take a gulp of pear blossom white wine. I actually listened to her suggestions back then, huh? Maybe it was because the end was nigh, and there was no more need to worry about accidentally pricking the Emperor's sore spot with a stray word or losing his head. Whatever the reason, the drooping old man spoke the candid truth. Yes, Liu Gong said. His eyes were downcast, and his hands tucked into his sleeves. When your majesty first ascended the throne, Empress Song was quite favored. There was a period of time when your majesty did aught the empress asked. Did your majesty forget? Forget? Moran chuckled. I didn't forget. How could I possibly forget? After he'd married Song Chitong, someone had whispered to her that the reason he favored her was solely due to her likeness to the deceased Qi Mingjing. She was a clever person. She spared no effort inquiring after Xi Mei's mannerisms and bearing, then subtly exhibited the same in their everyday life as husband and wife, so that it seemed almost like the dead had come back to life. How could he possibly forget? Moran smiled mirthlessly, then suddenly plucked the crown from atop his head and tossed it into the pond without bothering to look where it landed. A startled koi fish leapt from the water, and the visage reflected therein became warped and distorted. He loosened his top knot and let his inky hair fall. He leaned by the pond side, letting the mercurial light of the rippling, sparkling waters dance across his face. There we go. The crown's gone, and the hair's down. Old Liu, help me think. What more does this venerable one need to do to look as he did before the enthronement? A hair tie, right? Moran examined his reflection. That blue hair tie commonly worn by disciples of Xisheng Peak. Are there any left in the palace? There are. When you shed your disciple uniform to ascend the throne, your majesty charged this old one with its safekeeping. I will go fetch it, if that is your majesty's wish. Excellent. Go on then, bring the whole set. The hair tie too. Liu Gong left and returned bearing a stack of old clothes. Moran sat up, as the tips of his fingers brushed the familiar texture of the cotton and hemp. Snatches of the past fluttered up like dry leaves to land on his tattered heart. Now, eager, he took up an outer robe and put it on. But the clothing of his youth was far too small. It wouldn't fit, no matter how he tugged or pulled. He flew into a rage. Why doesn't it fit? Why can't I go back? He paced like a trapped beast in a cage, insanity in every line of his face, and his eyes flickering with a dangerous light. This is this venerable one's clothing, isn't it? Did you fetch the wrong set? If it is this venerable one's clothing, why would it not fit? Why would it not fit? The old servant was by now accustomed to seeing his master in the grip of madness. Liu Gong used to think Moran's moods terrifying, but today, for some reason, he found the man before him pitiful instead. He wasn't looking for clothes. He was looking for himself, the Moran of the past who could never return. Your Majesty, the old man sighed, soft. Let it go. You're not that young man of years gone anymore." At these words, Moran ceased his raging and fell silent. His head whipped around fiercely to glare at the old man's withered face, but he was unable to get a single word out, as if he were choking, and in the end only breathed harshly as he stared with red-rimmed eyes. It was several minutes before he finally managed. "I'm not?" "You're not." A long pause. "I can't go back?" "You can't go back." For the first time, a childlike helplessness appeared on the face of that 32-year-old man. He closed his eyes, the jut of his throat bobbing. The old servant stood to the side with his head bowed, thinking, "Once he opens his eyes, he'll surely bare his fangs and shred everything in his path with a snarl." But when Moran opened his eyes again, they were wet with tears. Perhaps it was this that extinguished the inferno in his heart. Moran opened his mouth and, in a voice hoarse and weary, murmured, "I see. I see. I can't go back. I can't go back." He set down the rope as if exhausted, took a seat by the stone table, and buried his face in his hands. A long moment passed before he said, "Then I'll just tie up my hair." "Your Majesty, why do all this? This venerable one's life will end soon. Don't want to be too lonely when the time comes." His face remained in his hands as he spoke, his expression indiscernible. "I just want to change my clothes and feel like I still have old friends around for company." Liu Gong sighed. "That's just make-believe." "Make-believe is fine," Moran replied. "Make-believe is better than nothing." He pulled his long hair back, wrapping the tie around it once, twice. Then he picked up a hair clasp with faded edges from the pile of old clothes, intending to pin it in his hair just as he had when he was young. But as he looked at his reflection in the water, his hand stilled. Which side did the pin go in from again? Was it the left or the right? He hadn't used this hair clasp for many years. He could no longer remember. Moran closed his eyes and asked, "Old Liu, do you know how I used to wear my hair?" "To answer your Majesty, this old one only came into the palace 2 years after your enthronement. This old one cannot answer you." "But I can't remember." Moran insisted. "I need someone to tell me." Liu Gong remained silent. "Where can I find someone who knows?" Moran murmured. "Who can tell me what I used to look like?" Old Liu heaved a lengthy sigh, but couldn't think of a single name. Truthfully, Moran also knew, in his heart, that the old man had no answer to give him. And so, he held that black hair clasp uncertainly to his left, then to his right, before settling on the left side and pinning it there. "That seems right," Moran said. "Let me go ask him." He strode toward the inner recesses of the pavilion and came to the side of the red lotus pond where Chu Wanning's body lay, looking for all the world as if he were merely asleep. Moran settled himself down on the ground, then propped his cheek in one hand and said, "Shizun." The breeze carried with it the faint fragrance of the lotus blossoms. As he looked at that man lying with his eyes closed within the vibrant, intoxicating red of the pond, Moran now found he had quite a lot he wanted to say, but at the same time he didn't know what to say at all. When it came to Chu Wanning, Moran seemed always to be full of emotions, but those emotions were too jumbled, contained too many flavors. Amidst the sweet and the sour and the bitter and the spicy, he couldn't tell if the greater part of what he felt toward this man was hatred or something else. He really honestly didn't know how to behave toward this person. He had once convinced himself that the sole reason he kept Chu Wanning around was to vent his hatred and sate his desires. But then Chu Wanning had died, and Moran still kept this corpse that he could no longer even lie with. The grave had been dug, but Moran couldn't bear to bury him. What use was there in keeping this cold, unmoving corpse that couldn't speak? Even he didn't really know. The two of them had been through too much, and whatever tiny, pure thing there had been at the start had been drowned to death long ago. When Chu Wanning was still alive, the two rarely passed any peaceful, amicable days together. But now that Chu Wanning was gone, a kind of cruel gentleness grew between the living and the dead. Moran visited him often, a jar of pear blossom white wine in hand, and looked without saying much at all. Now he was besieged on all sides, and knew that his life was at an end. Dead as he was, Chu Wanning was the only person from his past, the last one left in this Xisheng peak that looked the same but held none of the same people, the only one who had stayed beside him all this time. Moran suddenly wanted to have a nice, long, heart-to-heart with this cold corpse. Chu Wanning was dead. He could neither protest nor berate him. No matter what Moran said, his Shizun would have no choice but to lie there and listen. Yet, when Moran tried to move his lips, his throat felt tight. In the end, he only managed to say one thing. "Shizun, pay attention to me."